All right, I am going to get started. My name is Mariana Hung Peavy, and I am the Grant and Loans Bureau Chief here with Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. And I'll be going over the State Revolving Fund Letter of Interest training. I do have a few other speakers that will be going today. We do have Charlie Parkins, the Grants and Loan Supervisor, and Nicholas Hebert will also be going over the letter of interest today. So just a few housekeeping items. This training will be recorded and a link will be emailed to all the attendees after the meeting. The slides have also been made available for the DEQ registrations for this training. If you haven't received it, don't worry, we'll send it out again just in case after the presentation. And we have muted everyone for this virtual training, but please put your questions in the chat box and we'll make sure to answer your questions at the end. If we don't answer it in the middle of it, if we do find a way to unmute you at the end, if you raise your hand, we'll try to help you out at the end of the meeting as well. So today, what we'll be going over is quickly some staff introductions. We do have a few new folks on our group, so we'll introduce them. We'll go over the letter of interest timeline and funding update, so you have a good idea of what kind of funding we'll be getting for our fiscal year 2026. We'll then deep dive into the letter of interest and then give some opportunities for you to ask questions and some discussions with those questions. Now for the grant and loan program, we have myself and Charlie Parkins, who I introduced, and Nicholas you'll meet later on today, who's our senior grant loans engineer. But we also have Rosemary Regner, who's also a grants and loan engineer for our group. She will definitely be helping with regional staff on overseeing many of the projects that you send through, and also some of the reporting that is required for some of the state revolving fund projects. So she may be reaching out to you or your consulting engineer to get some of that information. Now, Michael Stambulis, he is not on today, but he is part of our technical service division. I did want to introduce him because he helps us through the rating process of all the letters of interest. He will be assisting me through the public comment period. So if you do have questions on how some of your letters of interest have been rated, Michael Stambulis will be helping me answer some of those technical questions. We then have Zoe McCarty, our grant and loan analyst. She oversees the wastewater planning grants and the clean water SRF loans. Then we have Haley Brown, who is new with us. This is her second week, and she will be overseeing the drinking water planning grants and the drinking water SRF loans. We then have Garrett DeGear, who is out sick today, but he's our loan officer. He definitely helps maintain a lot of our databases to help us run this program and also assist with the letter of interest. So if you have any problems with any of the letter of interest forms, he will definitely help you out, along with Jade Jesser, who is our office specialist. He is assisting all of us, just like with answering a lot of the chat comments. Then we have Tim Wenlin. He is a grant and loan temp. Some of you may remember him if you've come to get funding with us before. He was the former grant and loans bureau chief, wealth of knowledge, and he assisting us currently and helping oversee the environmental review process, since that position used to be held by LaDawn Kaylor. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. And so we're looking to refill her position. So Tim is helping out there until that position is held. And for any questions in general, if you don't know who to quite go to, not a problem. Keep it simple. You can send any emails to grant.loans@deq.idaho.gov, and it will get to the right person to answer your question. Now, I'll go over a little bit of the timeline here. We have made the letters of interest available on our website. You can go to all of them now. They'll be available through January when the letter of interests are due. Then in January and February, we use that time to rate those letters of interest. And then in March, we prepare the priority list out of those rated letters of interest, and we put it out for public comment in April. So you do have an opportunity to look at the intended use plan that has all the different funding for the loans. In that document, we also have planning grant priority lists. Again, they're posted for public comment, and you're able to see how your letter of interest was rated and how you fall in the funding opportunities. And then in May, we take those lists with your public comments to the board for voting. And then in June, we do notify you the final results from the board vote. And then the funding will be available for our fiscal year 2026 on July 1st of 2025. Some resources that you might find helpful on filling out the letters of interest or even finding out more about our program. Definitely our customer handbook, which is available on our website. We also have our fiscal year 2025 intended use plan. Definitely look at that so you can see the structure of how we post the priority list and how those may have fell on the priority list in previous years. That may be similar systems to yours. We also have an Idaho DEQ YouTube page. And on that YouTube page, we have a variety of videos and recordings on that page. Just like this one will be posted on our YouTube page, so you can go back to it and utilize it for a resource. You can also refer to our previous trainings as a resource as well. Now, upon reviewing some of these resources, maybe some of those intended use plans or priority lists that we had up from previous years, and you want to see rating forms or get some information from those letter of interest that were submitted to use as examples, you definitely can do a public records request and obtain those. Now, lastly, if this is definitely, you just want additional help on filling out these letters of interest, please email us at that grant.loans@deqidaho.gov email, and you can request technical assistance. We can send someone out to help you with those letters of interest. So just know we are here to help and make sure that you can get through this process. Now, on to our fiscal year 2026 funding. I first wanted to give just a little bit of updates. Some of you guys may have heard of some funding that we had previously, or think that maybe we still have some available money out there with these different programs. And so I wanted to go over those with you. Now, for our fiscal year 2023, we received American Rescue Plan Act funding. We also received a little bit additionally the following year from the state. Altogether, we received $323 million. We did set aside some of it to address what we call cost overruns. Some projects have had received some higher cost estimates, so we had some available to help those projects we have funded. And I do have to say, this is great news. We have obligated it all out. There was a deadline to obligate all those funds by the end of 2024, and we have met that deadline. And so there is no funding, additional ARPA funding there. However, if you do have an ARPA project and you're kind of going, well, we need just a little bit more money, definitely please let us know, so we can brainstorm with you on how to fund your project. What I suggest is definitely you have the option to go ahead and submit a letter of interest to receive state revolving fund money. Or you can notify us and say that you want an increase, and we can use state revolving fund money to give you an increase or give you some funding, loan funding, to help finish off your project. Again, it's loan money that you'll be reaching out to. It's unlike the ARPA funding, which was a grant. If you do tap into the state revolving fund money, that is loan dollars. Now, some benefits to either reaching out to us privately. We can definitely help your project without having to go through the letter of interest process. However, by not going through the letter of interest process, I will let you know that you will not be able to tap into principal forgiveness, which may be something important for your community to get. And principal forgiveness works similarly to a grant. So there is definitely some benefits to submitting a letter of interest to help maybe your ARPA project address some higher costs that you didn't anticipate. We do know around 50% of the ARPA projects have gone out to bid, so they have a good idea of where they're at, but we do know there's about the other 50% that have not gone out to bid yet, and so may need state revolving funds to finish off their project. So please reach out to us. The Leading Idaho funds, we have obligated those funds out. We do have a little bit set aside for specifically Leading Idaho fund projects for if their project costs have gone up higher. So there is criteria in order to access some of that money. And if you need to know that information, please, again, just email us and we'll get you that information. Now, one other item I want to talk about is congressionally directed spending. I know some folks have heard of this and interested in maybe tapping into these funds. I will say that congressional directed spending, or earmarks, or STAG grants, as they may be referred to, does not get overseen by my bureau. You do have to work directly with EPA if you do get access to some of that money. I will say, as far as I know, only Congress, Mike Simpson in the state of Idaho is the only one putting any funding in Idaho towards those projects. And lastly, I will let you know that this money does have to come from somewhere. And right now, the state revolving fund money is getting swiped by Congress to fund congressionally directed spending. So you may be wondering why some of my funding has gone down a little bit more, and this is exactly why my funding for what we call the base, our regular annual SRF funding, is definitely getting cut down by more than half. To give you an example, usually we get around $11 million a year for drinking water SRF funding, and that is now down to 4.9 million. This is 4.9 million we get now, and that we lend out and then stays in the state and revolves in our program. So this impact of this reduction is, once it's gone for years. It does not stay within the state after that. And it goes to most of the projects that we get funded in Idaho is less than some of the money that's actually going out to other states to fund some of this congressionally directed spending. Another thing I definitely want to be very transparent with, I did get a report from EPA, and they are very short-staffed in handling these projects that are getting funded through congressional directed spending. As of right now, Congress has appropriated 2,200 projects from this funding, and only 457 of them have actually received the actual money that's due to staffing. And these 2,200 projects, it's been over the last 3 years that they've been appropriated. So it is taking quite a bit of time for communities to actually get access to this money. So if you do go this route, just put that in your planning effort. You'll be dealing with EPA directly, and that it may take quite a bit of time before you can actually get cash in hand to fund your projects. Now, Idaho DEQ did sign on to a Save the SRF program, really asking Congress not to take funding from the state revolving fund program to fund congressionally directed spending. We have no problem with them doing it. It's unfortunately taking it from this program in order to fund that program has kind of set stuff back, because right now there's about $3 billion just stuck in a bank account, not getting onto the ground. So definitely, if you guys would like to consider signing on to that or want to learn a little bit more about it, you can refer to that website. Now, on to next year's funding. As I mentioned, for example, our base grant for the drinking water SRF, I don't know exactly how much is going to be swiped from Congress, but I do think we're probably going to stay around the same of 4.9, even though that's down from 11. I'm very hopeful that we will have about the same amount come to us this year. I don't believe with the election and things going on that they're going to change too much and take any more of the money, but again, I'm not 100% sure. Haven't gotten final word on that, but I am doing my estimates based off of the grant being similar to last year. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure law drinking water SRF funding, this is temporary funding that we received. We're getting 5 years of funding. We've already used 3 years, so next year we'll be using that money again, and for 1 more year after that, and that will go away. And this supplemental funding, we are getting $24.8 million next year to put towards drinking water SRF projects. So I'm anticipating for next year for drinking water SRF projects, I'll have around, with some recycled dollars, I'll have around a little over $30 million to lend out to new projects. Some additional bill funding that we are receiving is to address lead service line replacements. I should be getting $28.6 million to lend out there. And then again, that's a loan program. And then I'm receiving some bipartisan infrastructure law emerging contaminants funding. And I will be getting $7.6 million to put towards emerging contaminants. And this is 100% principal forgiveness. So essentially it works like 100% grant. For the drinking water planning grants, we'll be receiving $350,000 to put out for grants. For the Clean Water SRF, the base grant, again, we usually get about $8 million, but with the earmark reduction, I'm estimating we'll get around $4 million for the base. For the bill supplemental, we'll be getting $12 million. So altogether with some recycled dollars, I'm estimating I'll have probably about $25 million available next year to put towards new projects. Then we have clean water emerging contaminants that we'll be receiving $1 million for that, and wastewater planning grants will have $350,000. Next year, we will not be taking any sewer overflow stormwater grant funding due to changes with EPA and their grant requirements, also some internal databases we have to use. It's really difficult to bring in the 200,000 for this grant program. What we're hoping to do is to get some to double up the grant from EPA and do it next year. Again, for the, oh yeah, looks like your question got answered there, Chelsea, but now some of this funding you might be a little bit nervous that some of it's lower than maybe we've seen in the last couple of years with all this additional funding coming into our program. But do know the importance of submitting a letter of interest. If you need funding of any sort for your drinking water or wastewater system, please submit a letter of interest. This is the only way definitely we can inform state legislators the demand and the infrastructure needs in the state of Idaho. I am working with University of Idaho to do a report and do a review on the infrastructure needs here in the state of Idaho. You may get some surveys. If you see that, please answer it. Again, we're really trying to educate the state representatives of the infrastructure needs and the need for funding so we can assist you even further. There is a huge gap, and I'll show you a little bit of what we saw last year. So as you can see, the demand versus how much we have there's a big gap. Last year, we had over $800 million requested of us, and we had nearly about $65 million to put out towards projects. So we're very aware of that. But again, submitting a letter of interest is very helpful for us to communicate out your needs. A lot of times if they don't see these letter of interest for these projects, they may be unaware of what's really needing to happen with your upgrades to your drinking water and wastewater projects. So one thing I will kind of clarify, I kind of come up on the chat, I kind of see here. I do want to say that when I was mentioning what I had available for funding, I meant for the projects that are on the priority list for this next fiscal year. I'm referring those to as new projects. But definitely if you have a current project that we have funded and you wanting to receive some additional funding, definitely submit a letter of interest. Again, the money I have available is to any of those that are on the priority list. And this is just a quick slide just to show you about how much I'm getting in general with all these pools of money on the drinking water side, plus the bipartisan infrastructure law funding and the clean water side. Now, I wanted you to be able to see the difference between the base funding and then this additional bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we're only going to be receiving 2027, our fiscal year that's the last year that we'll have the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and then we'll be going back to the base grant levels. All right, let me check this next slide. And now I will pass it on to Nicholas to do a deep dive into the letters of interest.
All right, thanks, Mariana. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mariana said, my name is Nicholas, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the letters of interest. So you can find those in case you haven't taken a look at them before. You can find those on our website. And if you go to www.deq.idaho.gov, Under the water tab, you can find the grants and loans page. And if you scroll down the page, about halfway down the page, you'll see the funding opportunities there and then links to each letter of interest. Now, I can tell you that we've made a few tweaks to the letters of interest. Every year we go cross-eyed for months trying to fix all the problems we find and get them absolutely perfect. So hopefully they're perfect this year. I'm not holding my breath, but you can rest assured we didn't make a lot of changes to them this year. If you're familiar with them, if you filled them out before, they're going to look similar, they're going to feel similar. So I am going to dive into the details of how to fill out a letter of interest. So if you're familiar with that, you can go ahead and tune me out, maybe check your emails, multitask a little bit. But if you're new to the letter of interest process, we're going to walk through a little bit how to fill out an LOI, maybe some things to look for. And really even the first question being, what LOI do I fill out? That's a common question that we get a lot of times is what LOI is right for me, and it really depends on what you're trying to do. So let's dive into it. Next slide, please. So when you look at our LOIs, they're really we talk about kind of two different tracks of LOIs, if you will. One being the drinking water DWSRF, and the other being the clean water SRF or wastewater typically. The drinking water SRF is pretty specific to public drinking water systems. So if you're a public drinking water system, this funding you're eligible for this DWSRF funding. On the clean water side, our eligibilities are a little bit more open. Basically, any system that any district or nonprofit, that's the big one, you can't be for profit, that provides a direct improvement to groundwater or surface water is eligible for this clean water SRF funding. That being said, historically, traditionally speaking, wastewater has been what most of this funding goes to, primarily just because there's such a great need for it. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these LOIs and what LOI would be right for you. So we'll go next slide, please. All right, so the first LOIs are the planning grant LOIs, and we have a planning grant LOI for drinking water, and we have a planning grant LOI for wastewater. These LOIs are specific to preparing a planning document. So they cannot be used for construction. And I think that's a really important distinction sometimes that folks can kind of get confused with when they see the word grant. They want to get a grant for construction. They want to get a grant to build something. This is not the LOI to fill out. This is for developing a planning document. And a planning document is important to us because that's really what's going to be the pre-development to lead you into a project. This is setting yourself up for success, not only in developing a project, but also in planning for the future. These are 20 to 40-year plans. They're also typically referred to as a facility plan or a master plan. That's really the intent of this funding is to go to planning grants. Now we call it planning grants to give you a little bit of flexibility in terms of sometimes there's special planning documents that maybe they're not a master plan, maybe they're not quite a facility plan, maybe they're a special planning document, a specific part of your system or a specific focus to that planning effort. So there's some flexibility there with the planning grants. But again, bread and butter for these planning grants are going to be developing a facility plan, a master plan for your drinking water or your wastewater system. So those are planning grants. The next slide, please. Which again, lead into a construction project. And this is where if you've completed a facility plan, if you have a project that needs constructed, the DWSRF LOI and the Clean Water SRF LOI, those are going to be the LOIs you want to focus on. Those are the funding sources, the primary funding sources, like Mariana talked about, that are going to take you through construction. Again, low interest loans, and Mariana talked about there's sometimes options for principal forgiveness to be worked into these low interest loans. But they're going to give you the funding you need to go into construction with a project and take it the distance. There are a couple special pots of money that we've gotten in years past. these have been really the 4 LOIs that we've had for decades. With the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've been given some special pots of money, if you will. We like to think of them as headaches, but that being said, they have specific purposes for the funding. And we'll go to the next slide, please, and talk a little bit about those. The first special pots of money are called the emerging contaminant funds, and those are both the drinking water emerging contaminants and the clean water emerging contaminants. And they're similar, a little bit different in places. There's some nuanced differences, but they're very similar, one being applied to drinking water and one being applied to the clean water or the wastewater. This funding, although it's 100% principal forgiveness, has a very specific purpose, and that's to address emerging contaminants. And the focus of these emerging contaminants is really the PFAS, the forever chemicals that we've seen really come onto the stage in the last several years. That being said, it's not limited to PFAS. You can also basically any emerging contaminant, any contaminant that does not have an existing maximum contaminant level can be eligible for this funding. These are things we see like cyanotoxins is a common one we see in both drinking water and wastewater world, clean water world. It might be something specific to drinking water, like manganese as another example. And there's whole lists of emerging contaminants that you can look at that are linked within these LOIs that you can click on and get a list of these emerging contaminants that might qualify you for this funding. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. The catch with these is you have to know that you have an emerging contaminant, which means you have to do sampling. And so this isn't a hypothetical thing where we think there might be some, nasty contaminant in our drinking water. You kind of have to know to be eligible for this funding. So that means you really need to get ahead of it, do some sampling, figure out where it is, where it's coming from, and then come to us and say, hey, we've got this problem. And some systems are a little bit hesitant to look for a problem, right? And so that can create a challenge for getting this funding out. But really encourage you to look at that and try to get ahead of that, because again, it's 100% principal forgiveness, and it's a great opportunity to address some issues that proactively instead of reactively. So, and then last but not least, next slide, we'll move on to the lead service line replacement LOI. Again, this is a very specific pot of money. It's actually our largest pot of money right now, as Mariana alluded to, with all the slashing and dashing that's going on in the SRF world. The lead service line replacement funding stands, head and tail above everybody else. So this funding, though, is very specific to replacing drinking water lead service lines or galvanized service lines that require replacement. It's tied into the lead service line inventory and the revised lead and copper rule that is requiring systems to inventory all their service lines and then put together a replacement for any identified lead or galvanized lines that have potential or known lead contamination in that galvanized coating. And so a lot of funding available there. We're trying to make it work. It's problematic on a couple of levels. I'm not going to go into the details, but if you know that you have lead service lines or galvanized lines that potentially have lead contamination, this is a great opportunity to get funding. We have a lot of funding, and so far, not a lot of demand on this funding. And so, again, it has to fit the eligibility and the specific circumstances of your project to be eligible for this funding, but it's a great opportunity. So those are the letters of interest that we have, and those are the eligibilities and what fits each letter of interest. So hopefully that helps. If you're confused on which LOI to fill out, again, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email at the grants.loans email, and we'll make sure that we get you in the right direction there. I am going to move on to an example LOI, just kind of for folks that haven't filled out one of these or ever seen one of these. I just kind of want to walk through and kind of give you a flavor or a feeling for some of the information that you'll need to be filling out. Again, if you're familiar with these LOIs, you can go answer emails and multitask. It won't hurt anybody's feelings whatsoever. So this is what a drinking water SRF LOI looks like. And again, if you're paying attention, this would be for a public drinking water system that already has a facility plan that wants to move into construction. So the first section is just general project information. Section 1A is really basic information, assuming that you should know who you are and know this information, but it gives us the ability to know who you are and how to contact you, the primary contacts, and how to get in contact with you. Section B is then going to move into the project itself, the details of the project. There's some eligibility constraints there. For example, just an example highlighted there, question number B2 asks you about your planning document, your facility plan. Have you done a facility plan? We need to know that because we're really trying to look for projects that are shovel ready, right? These are projects moving into construction, and a facility plan will be required as part of DEQ requirements. And so we're looking for communities that are shovel ready. They've got a facility plan completed. We do provide some flexibility there. You can see in the questions that if you're already in the process of developing it, or we do have some leniency to provide loan funding, so to complete the planning document. So there's some options there, but basically at the end of the day, you need to have a facility plan with a selected alternative to be able to move forward with this construction funding. Another kind of highlight there is, Mariana kind of alluded to this, is this LOI really intended to address a construction shortfall for an existing project? And so if you're filling out this LOI for an existing project that has a shortfall, check that box to let us know. It kind of helps us plan for how we set up our intended use plans and how we at least plan to distribute some of these funds to the best of our ability. We want to make sure we don't have half-built projects to the best of our ability and help out the folks that have ongoing projects that are kind of stuck a little bit in some of these construction shortfalls. So that's kind of the intent of that question. The questions continue through just kind of asking you about your project and some specifics of what that project will look like. And again, each one of these is going to be different. So fill this out to the best of your ability. And if we have questions, we'll certainly follow up with you. All right, moving on, next slide. Continuing into section C, this is really, again, getting in the details of the project itself. It's going to ask you for really what the project description is and allow you to reference back to your facility plan so that we make sure that, again, we're getting these shovel-ready projects that are moving forward. Question number 3 is another and number 4 are good questions to kind of hit on. We get this question quite a bit, that the project, it can't be primarily used for growth or for fire flow. And so there's kind of some nuances in there. Reasonable growth is something that we can, definitely fund, and reasonable assumptions for fire flow are something that we can fund. But it has to really be built into the project. For example, we can't fund a project that is just purely a development. So if you've got a subdivision going in, that's not really the intent of this project. We could fund a project that, say, is a new well for an existing municipality because they're anticipating some growth or having some capacity issues based on some expansions within the system. And so there's some nuances there, some differences. In the same way, we wouldn't be able to fund a project that just replaces fire hydrants, but we would be able to fund a project that is a distribution system improvement project that replaces fire hydrants along with the distribution system. So again, some nuances there. The focus of the project has to be more than just growth or fire flow. Questions number 6 and number 7 are really intended to point you in the right direction. If you're going to do emerging contaminants, we're wanting to point you towards that emerging contaminant funding, that PFAS and cyanotoxin funding that we talked about. And then wanting to try to point you again, question number 7, to if you're going to do lead service line replacement or inventory as part of this project, we're trying to point you to that lead service line LOI, because that's a great opportunity to not only fund the project that you're looking at, but also bring other funding alongside. So looking to kind of balance those new funding sources with our existing funding sources. It's been tricky, but we're doing our best to try to get as much funding to the people of Idaho as possible through these pots of funding. Section D dials into the project costs. We need to know how much the project's going to cost, where other funding sources are coming from, and what the estimated total project cost is. Moving on to question 3 in this section. Again, these are low interest loans, and so you do need ability to incur debt. And so this question is getting to, how are you going to legally incur that debt, and where are you at in that process? And so, again, something to think through as you're preparing to think about submitting an LOI for construction. There's some little things that you need to think about, maybe plan for. Maybe you're not quite ready to submit an LOI. Like Mariana said, we want you to submit an LOI because we want to get to be able to see the needs in the state, but there's also some planning in the background that you need to be doing as well. All right, moving on to the next slide. This is where the fun begins, which is section 2, which is the priority rating system. And so this is what this section 2 is what we use to be able to rate and then develop a rank and a priority list of systems from highest ranked to lowest ranked. And those systems that rank the highest are the systems that are more than likely going to receive the funding. And so this section always takes a lot of work to fill out, and it takes a lot of work for us to sort through the answers and make sure that we're being equitable and fair across the state. So we spend a lot of time working through these questions. So Section 1A, Section A1 is a public health hazard, and these questions are really focused on for a public drinking water system. They're really focused on contamination and really major public health hazards, as the name suggests. And so question 1 is looking at contaminants in the system, so Tier 1 or Tier 2 contaminants. Question number 1C is really focused on surface water treatment technique violations, such as turbidity or other things similar to that. Question number 2 is focused on depressurization of your distribution system. This is one that a lot of folks will check the box, but maybe not necessarily meet the intent of it. We're looking for, as the question asks, we're looking for at least 3 or more depressurizations in the last 24 months. And so it's something that's persistent. It's happened more than once, and it's happened in the last 2 years. So recent, something that's fairly recent and persistent. And question number 3, I'm going fast through these questions, so definitely looking forward if there's questions, we can come back and talk about these specific questions. Question number 3 really has to do with the loss of capacity in your source. And so this would be like a well that goes dry, that you have a reduction in water level. Again, different from a pump that goes bad. We'll capture that in section B, but this is really focused on like the actual aquifer or the surface water intake, reduced capacity. So question number 4 is kind of a catch-all, but it gives us an ability to capture major infrastructure deficiencies that would cause a significant health hazard. So for example, if there's a water tank that's structurally unstable and it's leaking and it has contamination pathways, maybe holes in the roof, that's something that would be a significant public health hazard, and that would receive points here. Question number 5, the last one in here, is getting at, again, emerging unregulated contaminants, which would also be kind of the emerging contaminant side of things. There's been a lot of focus on that in the last several years, so we try to capture it here in addition to the emerging contaminant LOI. So that's going to get us through section A. That's where the kind of the big points are, if you will. That's like the high public health hazards. Section B is maybe a little bit of a lower hazard, but is something definitely worth consideration under these general conditions of existing facilities. We'll go to the next slide, please. All right, so question in section B's, questions 1A and 1B are in regards to treatment facilities and treatment deficiencies. I'm not going to read those questions, but if you're operating a treatment facility, whether that's surface water or treating groundwater, and you can't reliably meet the requirements, you'll be able to get points under this section. Section number 2 is reduction in source capacity, and this is where you would have maybe a pump that's going bad. So maybe in contrast to section A, maybe the aquifer is fine, but you've got a well pump that's going bad, and you have a reduction in source capacity. This is where you would get points under that section. Question number 3 is all about the distribution system. A lot of points given out under this question because there's always a lot of issues with the distribution system. And then question number 4, again, a pretty open-ended question, but your project is going to address reliability or resiliency. And this is something, for example, an easy one would be you're installing a backup generator on a booster pump station. The key to these questions, I'll just kind of pause here, is that they all ask for documentation or description, and we really needs to be clear. I'd recommend clear and concise. When we rank these, we're going to go through them, and we're going to look for that clear and concise documentation. We don't need a novel, right? We don't need a 300-page document to sort through to find the answer, to find the documentation. But at the same time, it needs to make sense. There needs to be documentation that makes sense, and we need to understand how this question is being answered and why it makes sense. And so really make sure you have documentation and make sure it's clear and concise, and that's going to help us rank this LOI, especially under these questions, a lot more efficiently. Okay, but we're not done yet. Next slide. We are into sustainability or green infrastructure requirements. And so these are essentially construction and or management practices that we are required to incentivize. These are things like variable frequency drives on pumps that save us energy. These are things like energy efficiency motors, high efficiency lighting. There's also management-based sustainability efforts. We do have a new question for those of you interested under section 1 under the management-based efforts, where we're incentivizing cyber-informed engineering, which is a kind of a new emerging concept. It's really exciting for us to look at the kind of a common sense approach to cybersecurity and how we can potentially implement mechanical or manual safeguards within these critical infrastructures, so that when, say, hackers, when they do get in, not if, but when they do get in, that we can really limit the damage that they can do within these critical infrastructure environments. And so we're excited to kind of incentivize that and see what kind of interest we can get. Things like a capital improvement budget, a rate study, those are all management-based efforts that we incentivize here. Again, these are a chance to get up to 50 points, kind of easy. You might say easy points. The only catch is that there is a final exam at the end of the class. You will have to actually implement these things that you commit to, and so there will be follow-up throughout the loan, throughout the construction project, and at the end of the construction project to make sure that we capture these things that we said we were going to do. All right, next slide. That takes us to the end here. The last two sections, section D is really focused on compliance, bringing systems back into compliance. And so we've got some questions here. If the system is moderately out of compliance, or if there's high level noncompliance. We've got some questions here. Again, the intent of the funding is going to try to capture systems that are struggling, and we want to bring them back into compliance with this funding. And so the kicker here is sometimes folks will check these boxes, but the project scope has nothing to do with the non-compliance activity. And so we really have to stop and make sure that the non-compliance that the system that you're experiencing will be brought back into compliance with this funding, with this project. And so if that's the case, these points they're actually quite big points for the LOIs, and can really potentially get projects funded that are high priority. Section E, moving on, are the bonus points for incentives. These are really intended to, lack of a better word, incentivize or reward systems who are really being proactive and really kind of ahead of the curve in managing their water system. These are things like having a cross-connection control plan. These are things like being free of significant deficiencies in a sanitary survey, or having to address those significant deficiencies in a sanitary survey. And there's a few other there. I won't read them, but again, the intent of this is to incentivize systems that are being proactive on their system and doing a good job managing their drinking water system. So that gets us kind of through the bulk of the LOI and the point system. There's one last section in the point system that I will hand over to Charlie to talk about, and then he'll take us through to the finish line. So it's all yours, Charlie.
Thank you, Nicholas. Just a second as we get our technology figured out. And I think we got it. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Parkins. As Nicholas mentioned, if I'm speaking, we're getting close to the end. And one of the big topics of the LOI is the affordability disadvantage stuff, aka the principal forgiveness or the free money that everybody is looking to get a hold of. So on the LOI, some key things. Number one, just how many EDUs, how many connections do you have? Please fill that out. Question two is, what is the current average user rate? If you have a flat fee, just put that in. If you combine a variable and a flat fee, do your best to what the average is for that per month per EDU, and then put a description of approximately where you're getting your numbers from. Three is when the data you're using was, or the most recent data, the user rates have been increased, so we can see exactly how the rates are being set. Any kind of change in O&M that you're expecting. And then if you are kind of forward thinking and you are anticipating taking out a loan and you've already included or you've already started raising your rates and you're calculating that in with your cost, please put that in there for number 5. And then to figure out exactly how what your MHI is, I'm going to try to show you where to go. So if you hop over to census.org/locate, you'll see this is where you can find the MHI for your system. For cities, it's pretty straightforward. You'll just type in, city of Cuna, city of Craigmont, Boise, whatever the city is, and you'll use that for the MHI. If you're an association or a district or a county, then you'll use something might be a little bit different. So to show you how to use this, I'm just going to put in the address for DEQ as if this was a system that was looking to get funding. And on the left over here, you'll see, if you move your cursor down, you'll see it highlights different portions of the map. The idea here is to use the MHI that is most applicable to the system. And so if it's the city of Boise, like I said, you would click on the city of Boise. If you're an association or something, and maybe you're all within 83706, or maybe you're even smaller, you're all within this highlighted area of the map, you would click on that area of the map to see what the MHI is. So if you click, if the city of Boise was submitting an or a LOI, you would scroll down and you'd see this number here, MHI of 79977. So to find out if you are eligible for principal forgiveness, you need to see if your user rates are 2% or higher. So you take that MHI of 79977 times 2% divided by 12, and you're going to get about $133. And so if your user rates are $133 a month or higher, then you're likely going to qualify for principal forgiveness. And so that is the data that we are looking for the MHI. When you're submitting the letter of interest, please go ahead and either attach the page where you got the MHI or include the link, because we will go back and verify just to make sure that everything looks correct. And so please include that information with the letter of interest. If you have a situation where you pull up the city or the area and you're like, that's not right. There's no way that the MHI is that high or maybe even that low for the system. What you'll do is reach out to us and we can use some technical assistance to do an income survey for the area that's submitting the LOI, and we can go through and do a double check to see exactly if that MHI number is correct, or use the one that a third-party provider can get from doing an income survey. If you fall between the 1.5% and 2% of that MHI, so maybe you're just a little below that 2%, but you're still above 1.5%, there's a couple other criteria that you still might be able to get principal forgiveness. And so if you have unemployment that is exceeding the state of Idaho, or if you have declining population, please submit that data with your LOI, and that will help us determine how much principal forgiveness, or if you're eligible for principal forgiveness. And speaking of it, we don't really know exactly how much principal forgiveness each system is going to get until we get all the letters of interest. If we have a large number of systems that are submitting letters of interest and a large number of them are eligible, then obviously that's going to thin out the amount of principal forgiveness that each system gets. If there's only a handful of systems that qualify for principal forgiveness, then you're likely to get a bigger chunk of principal forgiveness. We have a required minimum amount that we have to give out, so that's one of the red tape / loopholes that we have to deal with. And so we will allocate that based on whatever the LOIs that come in. And so unfortunately, we don't know how much each system is going to get until we get all those LOIs. So I think next slide, Mariana. And then finally, the last section of the letter of interest is just to sign it and to go ahead and submit it. The due date for all the letters of interest is January 10th, 2025. We start ranking these immediately after, so we can't accept any late entries. So make sure that we're getting those in by January 10th, 2025, so that we can get your system in the ranking criteria and get your system ranked. To submit it, you'll submit it to grants.loans@deq.gov, idaho.gov, so please submit your LOIs to there. Next slide, Maria. For context, if you're looking for emergency funding, if you're looking for lead line replacement, I'll be the contact for that. If you are looking for drinking water loans or drinking water grants, Haley will be the contact. But as Mariana mentioned, Haley is just starting, and so she's kind of drinking from a fire hose. So you might CC me on any kind of questions you have related to drinking water loans or drinking water grants, particularly if they're for LOIs. And then for the wastewater loans, wastewater grants, Zoe will be the contact for that. And then if you have questions, you're like, I don't know who this needs to go to, just submit it to our general grants.loans email, and we will send your question on to whoever it should go to. So that's the contacts for everything. Next slide. If you're in the region and you have questions pertaining to your system, not necessarily administrative, but more like, is this going to be eligible? Who can I talk to at the regional level that can give me some insight on the LOI or any kind of information pertaining to the system? These are the regional contacts, so they are also a great resource for information and for filling out the LOIs. Next slide. And I think I got us in right at 3 o'clock. And so we are going to open it up for questions. I think Zoe has already answered some, so we will either scroll up or we will either raise your hand if you have questions and we can try to unmute you so you can ask your questions. So we'll go through the questions.
All right, and to start, I just want to remind everyone this training is being recorded. We'll be sending out a link to the recording here in the next few days. If you don't receive a link by early next week, just send us an email to that grants and loans email and ask for a copy of the link and we can get that to you. First question I can answer, it says from Seth, can a city apply for planning grant money for wastewater if they're currently on individual septic systems but want to get a collection and treatment system installed? The answer to that is yes. Just as a reminder, that planning grant is for the creation of a facility plan. So you would first need to do the facility plan and then you would come back to us later for the loan. But that is an eligible expense for that project. Brett asks, is funding available with LSL funding costs associated with determining pipe material for unknown drinking water service lines? And I'll put that towards Nicholas.
Yeah, so the general answer, Brett, is yes. So lead service line inventory activities are eligible expenses. The devil's in the details a little bit with what the exact expense is and what that looks like. And so we would need to see that and work through what that actual activity would look like for determining those service lines. But in general, the answer is yes.
And the follow-up to that question, is a planning document required for lead service line inventory and replacement funding?
Again, the general answer is no. We do not require a planning document, a facility plan for replacement of service lines. However, if the project has a larger scope and you're replacing distribution mains and doing other work within the system, that would trigger the requirement for a planning document and a facility plan. So in general, no, but again, it really will be site specific and contextually specific to the project itself.
Right, this one is from Jason. Nicholas, you probably will be the best to answer this, but Marianne and Charlie, if you have any input, please chime in. It says, we're expecting an updated IPDS permit at the first quarter of 2025. That permit will officially create a regulatory issue. Is there a score and benefit to having IPDS issued before the application is due, the LOI? Is there another way to document the regulatory issue is imminent?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we do have, we try to capture that scenario to the best of our ability within the wastewater LOI, both the planning grant and the construction LOIs. Primarily, we try to capture that with like a draft planning document. So if IPDS, if your entity can get your hands on a draft planning document, you'll be incentivized. Those points will be incentivized if the project's going to address that regulatory issue. It gets a little bit more gray depending on what level of documentation you have. If you've got kind of wishy-washy information, so you don't really know what that permit limit's going to look like, or you're expecting it, you're estimating it, that's where we typically don't award points. We kind of need some level of certainty of what that discharge permit will look like and the impacts to your system. And that's why we really look at that draft permit as that tool of trying to be proactive, trying to get ahead of it, not waiting until it is an issue. But again, I know it can be difficult sometimes getting to a draft permit stage with IPDS. So give us what you have, do your best bet, and do your best effort. And again, I would say if you've got a draft permit in hand, you'll very much be able to we'll very much be able to incentivize those points, if that makes sense.
All right, and that's all the questions that I see in the chat right now. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat or raise your hand and I can unmute you. Thanks for sticking with us. We're a little bit over time, but last call for questions. All right, I think with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. If you have any lingering questions, please feel free to email us at that grants.loans email, and we wish you guys luck on your LOIs. We're here for you.